The Triumphs of a Taxidermist by H.G. Wells. Here are some of the secrets of taxidermy. They were told me by the taxidermist in a mood of elation. He told me them in the time between the first glass of whiskey and the fourth, when a man is no longer cautious and yet not drunk. We sat in his den together. His library it was, his sitting and his eating room, separated by a bead curtain, so far as the sense of sight went, from the noisome den where he plied his trade. He sat on a deck chair, and when he was not tapping refractory bits of coal with them, he kept his feet, on which he wore, after the manner of sandals, the holy relics of a pair of carpet slippers, out of the way, upon the mantelpiece, among the glass eyes. And his trousers, by the by, though they have nothing to do with his triumphs, were a most horrible yellow plaid, such as they made when our fathers wore side whiskers, and there were crinolines in the land. Further, his hair was black, his face rosy, and his eye a fiery brown, and his coat was chiefly of grease, upon a basis of velveteen, and his pipe had a bowl of china showing the graces, and his spectacles were always askew, the left eye glaring nakedly at you, small and penetrating, the right seen through a glass darkly, magnified and mild. Thus his discourse ran. "There never was a man who could stuff like me, Bellows. Never. I have stuffed elephants, and I have stuffed moths, and the things have looked all the livelier and better for it, and I have stuffed human beings, chiefly amateur ornithologists, but I stuffed a servant once. No, there is no law against it. I made him with all his fingers out and used him as a hat rack. But that fool Homersby got up a quarrel with him late one night and spoilt him. That was before your time. It is hard to get skins, or I would have another." "Unpleasant? I don't see it. Seems to me taxidermy is a promising third course to burial or cremation. You could keep all your dear ones by you. Bric-a-brac of that sort stuck about the house would be as good as most company, and much less expensive. You might have them fitted up with clockwork to do things. Of course, they would have to be varnished, but they need not shine more than lots of people do naturally. Old Manningtree's bald head. Anyhow, you could talk to them without interruption, even aunts. There is a great future before taxidermy, depend upon it. There is fossils again." He suddenly became silent. "No, I don't think I ought to tell you that." He sucked at his pipe thoughtfully. "Thanks, yes, not too much water. Of course, what I tell you now will go no further. You know I have made some dodos and a great auk. No? Evidently you are an amateur at taxidermy. My dear fellow, half the great auks in the world are about as genuine as the handkerchief of St. Veronica, as the holy coat of Treves. We make 'em of grebe's feathers and the like. And the great auk's eggs, too." "Good heavens!" "Yes, we make them out of fine porcelain. I tell you, it is worth while. They fetch, one fetched £300 only the other day. That one was really genuine, I believe, but of course one is never certain. It is very fine work, and afterwards you have to get them dusty, for no one who owns one of these precious eggs has ever the temerity to clean the thing. That's the beauty of the business. Even if they suspect an egg, they do not like to examine it too closely. It's such brittle capital at the best. You did not know that taxidermy rose to heights like that? My boy, it has risen higher. I have rivalled the hands of nature herself. One of the genuine great auks—" His voice fell to a whisper. "One of the genuine great auks was made by me." "No? You must study ornithology and find out which it is yourself. And what is more, I've been approached by a syndicate of dealers to stock one of the unexplored skerries to the north of Iceland with specimens. I may, some day. But I have another little thing in hand just now. Ever heard of the Dinornis? It is one of those big birds recently extinct in New Zealand. Moa is its common name, so called because extinct. There is no moa now. See? Well, they have got bones of it, and from some of the marshes even feathers and dried bits of skin. Now, I am going to... well, there is no need to make any bones about it, going to forge a complete stuffed moa. I know a chap out there who will pretend to make the find in a kind of antiseptic swamp and say he stuffed it at once, as it threatened to fall to pieces. The feathers are peculiar, but I've got a simply lovely way of dodging up singed bits of ostrich plume. Yes, that is the new smell you noticed. They can only discover the fraud with a microscope, and they will hardly care to pull a nice specimen to bits for that. In this way, you see, I give my little push in the advancement of science. But all this is merely imitating nature. I've done more than that in my time. I have beaten her. He took his feet down from the mantelboard and leant over confidentially towards me. I have created birds, he said in a low voice. New birds, improvements, like no birds that was ever seen before. He resumed his attitude during an impressive silence. Enrich the universe. Rather. Some of the birds I made were new kinds of hummingbirds, and very beautiful little things, but some of them were simply rum. The rummest, I think, was the Animalopteryx jejuna. Jejunus are, empty. So called because there was really nothing in it. A thoroughly empty bird, except for stuffing. Old Javers has the thing now, and I suppose he is almost as proud of it as I am. It is a masterpiece, Bellows. It has all the silly clumsiness of your pelican, all the solemn want of dignity of your parrot, all the gaunt ungainliness of a flamingo, with all the extravagant chromatic conflict of a mandarin duck. Such a bird. I made it out of the skeletons of a stork, and a toucan, and a job lot of feathers. Taxidermy of that kind is just pure joy, Bellows, to a real artist in the art. How did I come to make it? Oh, simple enough, as all great inventions are. One of those young genii who write us science notes in the papers got hold of a German pamphlet about the birds of New Zealand and translated some of it by means of a dictionary and his mother wit. He must have been one of a very large family with a small mother, and he got mixed between the living Apteryx and the extinct Animalopteryx. Talked about a bird 5 feet high living in the jungles of the North Island. Rare, shy, specimens difficult to obtain, and so on. Javers, who even for a collector is a miraculously ignorant man, read these paragraphs and swore he would have the thing at any price. Raided the dealers with inquiries. It shows what a man can do by persistence, willpower. Here was a bird collector swearing he would have a specimen of a bird that did not exist, that never had existed, and which, for very shame of its own profane ungainliness, probably would not exist now if it could help itself. And he got it. He got it. Have some more whiskey, Bellows, said the taxidermist, rousing himself from a transient contemplation of the mysteries of willpower and the collecting turn of mind. And, replenished, he proceeded to tell me of how he concocted a most attractive mermaid, and how an itinerant preacher, who could not get an audience because of it, smashed it, because it was idolatry, or worse, at Burslem wakes. But as the conversation of all the parties to this transaction, creator, would-be preserver and destroyer was uniformly unfit for publication, this cheerful incident must still remain unprinted. The reader, unacquainted with the dark ways of the collector, may perhaps be inclined to doubt my taxidermist. But so far as great auk's eggs and the bogus stuffed birds are concerned, I find that he has the confirmation of distinguished ornithological writers. And the note about the New Zealand bird certainly appeared in a morning paper of unblemished reputation, for the taxidermist keeps a copy and has shown it to me. A Deal in Ostriches by H.G. Wells. Talking of the prices of birds, I've seen an ostrich that costs £300, said the taxidermist, recalling his youth of travel. £300. He looked at me over his spectacles. I've seen another that was refused at £4. No, he said. It wasn't any fancy points, they was just plain ostriches. A little off colour, too, owing to dietary. And there wasn't any particular restriction of the demand either. You'd have thought 5 ostriches would have ruled cheap on an East Indiaman. But the point was, one of 'em had swallowed a diamond. The chap it got it off was Sir Mohini Padishah, a tremendous swell, a Piccadilly swell, you might say, up to the neck of him, and then an ugly head and a whopping turban with this diamond in it. The blessed bird pecked suddenly and had it. And when the chap made a fuss, it realised it had done wrong, I suppose, and went and mixed itself with the others to preserve its incog. It all happened in a minute. I was among the first to arrive, and there was this heathen going over his gods, and 2 sailors and the man who had charge of the birds laughing fit to split. It was a rummy way of losing a jewel, come to think of it. The man in charge hadn't been about just at the moment, so that he didn't know which bird it was. Clean lost, you see. I didn't feel half sorry, to tell you the truth. The beggar had been swaggering over his blessed diamond ever since he came aboard. A thing like that goes from stem to stem of a ship in no time. Everyone was talking about it. Padishah went below to hide his feelings. At dinner, he pigged at a table by himself, him and 2 other Hindus. The captain kind of jeered at him about it, and he got very excited. He turned round and talked into my ear. He would not buy the birds. He would have his diamond. He demanded his rights as a British subject. His diamond must be found. He was firm upon that. He would appeal to the House of Lords. The man in charge of the birds was one of those wooden-headed chaps you can't get a new idea into anyhow. He refused any proposal to interfere with the birds by way of medicine. His instructions were to feed them so-and-so and treat them so-and-so, and it was as much as his place was worth not to feed them so-and-so and treat them so-and-so. Padishah had wanted a stomach pump, though you can't do that to a bird, you know. This Padishah was full of bad law, like most of these blessed Bengalis, and talked of having a lien on the birds and so forth. But an old boy, who said his son was a London barrister, argued that what a bird swallowed became ipso facto part of the bird, and that Padishah's only remedy lay in an action for damages. And even then, it might be possible to show contributory negligence. He hadn't any right of way about an ostrich that didn't belong to him. That upset Padishah extremely, the more so as most of us expressed an opinion that that was the reasonable view. There wasn't any lawyer aboard to settle the matter, so we all talked pretty free. At last, after Arden, it appears that he came round to the general opinion, and went privately to the man in charge and made an offer for all 5 ostriches. The next morning there was a fine shindy at breakfast. The man hadn't any authority to deal with the birds, and nothing on earth would induce him to sell. But it seems he told Padishah that a Eurasian named Potter had already made him an offer, and on that, Padishah denounced Potter before us all. But I think the most of us thought it rather smart of Potter, and I know that when Potter said that he'd wired at Arden to London to buy the birds and would have an answer at Suez, I cursed pretty richly at a lost opportunity. At Suez, Padishah gave way to tears, actual wet tears, when Potter became the owner of the birds and offered him 250 right off for the 5, being more than 200% on what Potter had given. Potter said he'd be hanged if he parted with a feather of them, that he meant to kill them off one by one and find the diamond. But afterwards, thinking it over, he relented a little. He was a gambling hound, was this Potter, a little queer at cards, and this kind of prize packet business must have suited him down to the ground. Anyhow, he offered for a lark to sell the birds separately to separate people by auction at a starting price of £80 for a bird. But one of them, he said, he meant to keep for luck. You must understand this diamond was a valuable one. A little chap, a diamond merchant who was with us, had put it at 3,000 or 4,000 when Padishah had shown it to him, and this idea of an ostrich gamble caught on. Now it happened that I'd been having a few talks on general subjects with the man who looked after these ostriches, and quite incidentally he'd said one of the birds was ailing, and he fancied it had indigestion. It had one feather in its tail almost all white, by which I knew it, and so when, next day, the auction started with it, I capped Padishah's 85 by 90. I fancy I was a bit too sure and eager with my bid, and some of the others spotted the fact that I was in the know, and Padishah went for that particular bird like an irresponsible lunatic. At last the diamond merchant got it for £175, and Padishah said £180 just after the hammer came down, so Potter declared. At any rate, the merchant secured it, and there and then he got a gun and shot it. Potter made a Hades of a fuss, because he said it would injure the sale of the other 3, and Padishah, of course, behaved like an idiot. But all of us were very much excited. I can tell you I was precious glad when that dissection was over and no diamond had turned up. Precious glad. I'd gone to 140 on that particular bird myself. The little diamond merchant was like most merchants. He didn't make any great fuss over bad luck, but Potter declined to go on with the auction until it was understood that the goods could not be delivered until the sale was over. The little merchant wanted to argue that the case was exceptional, and as the discussion ran pretty even, the thing was postponed until the next morning. We had a lively dinner table that evening, I can tell you, but in the end Potter got his way, since it would stand to reason he would be safer if he stuck to all the birds, and that we owed him some consideration for his sportsmanlike behaviour. And the old gentleman whose son was a lawyer said he'd been thinking the thing over, and that it was very doubtful if, when a bird had been opened and the diamond recovered, it ought not to be handed back to the proper owner. I remember I suggested it came under the laws of treasure trove, which was really the truth of the matter. There was a hot argument, and we settled it was certainly foolish to kill the bird on board the ship. Then the old gentleman, going at large through his legal talk, tried to make out the sale was a lottery and illegal, and appealed to the captain. But Potter said he sold the birds as ostriches. He didn't want to sell any diamonds, he said, and didn't offer that as an inducement. The 3 birds he put up, to the best of his knowledge and belief, did not contain a diamond. It was in the one he kept, or so he hoped. Prices ruled high next day all the same. The fact that now there were 4 chances instead of 5, of course, caused a rise. The blessed birds averaged 227, and oddly enough, this Padishah didn't secure one of them, not one. He made too much shindy, and when he ought to have been bidding, he was talking about liens. And besides, Potter was a bit down on him. One fell to a quiet little officer chap, another to the little merchant, and the third was syndicated by the engineers. And then Potter seemed suddenly sorry for having sold them, and said he'd flung away a clear £1,000, and that very likely he'd draw a blank, and that he always had been a fool. But when I went and had a bit of a talk to him, with the idea of getting him to hedge on his last chance, I found he'd already sold the bird he'd reserved to a political chap that was on board, a chap who'd been studying Indian morals and social questions in his vacation. That last was the £300 bird. Well, they landed 3 of the blessed creatures at Brindisi, though the old gentleman said it was a breach of the customs regulations, and Potter and Padishah landed too. The Hindu seemed half mad as he saw his blessed diamond going this way and that, so to speak. He kept on saying he'd get an injunction. He had injunction on the brain, and giving his name and address to the chaps who'd bought the birds, so that they'd know where to send the diamond. None of them wanted his name and address, and none of them would give their own. It was a fine row, I can tell you, on the platform. They all went off by different trains. I came on to Southampton, and there I saw the last of the birds as I came ashore. It was the one the engineers bought, and it was standing up near the bridge in a kind of crate, and looking as leggy and silly a setting for a valuable diamond as ever you saw, if it was a setting for a valuable diamond. How did it end? Oh, like that. Well, perhaps. Yes, there's one more thing that I may throw light on it. A week or so after landing, I was down Regent Street doing a bit of shopping, and who should I see arm in arm and having a purple time of it but Padishah and Potter. If you come to think of it. Yes, I've thought that. Only you see, there's no doubt the diamond was real, and Padishah was an eminent Hindu. I've seen his name in the papers often. But whether the bird swallowed the diamond certainly is another matter, as you say. Thank you for listening to The Triumphs of a Taxidermist and A Deal in Ostriches by H.G. Wells. If you have enjoyed this audiobook, please consider subscribing and leaving a like to help in the making of future audiobooks.